الرحمن الرحيم. قال من حجة الإسلام al-Ghazali رحمه الله ونفعنا به وبكم. So we got in the discussion when he's talking about obviously avoiding the haram and taking what is permissible, but then also just because something is halal doesn't mean we have to get excessive into it, So the discussion was about that. How do we know what's excessive? How do we know what's acceptable? So he's talking a lot about that, and to be honest, this is a real issue as well with a lot of people. I do get asked this question as well now and then, what's considered excessive, what's considered okay for a Muslim or a mu'min to do, because we live in affluent society, therefore most people do have cash to spend on luxuries, let's say. So luxuries are anything that is not really like a necessity, Like I said before, necessity in Sharia is your food, clothing, transport and shelter. Food, clothing, shelter and transport is considered a necessity in Sharia. But then obviously people often ask what level is considered moderate, what is considered israf, too excessive, what would be blameworthy, etc. So this is partly what Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah has been talking about as well. He's mentioned several things, like one is anything that is beyond the real basic necessity is going to be something that you'll be asked about. You'll have a hisab. ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. On that day you will be asked about pleasures. And in one narration that was explained that na'im it could even mean a cold drink. Even a cold drink is come under pleasure. So anything beyond your basic necessity, you will be asked about. There will be a hisab. Doesn't mean you'll be necessarily punished for it, but it will be something you'll be asked about, reckoned about. Okay, so I think there's definitely an issue. It depends on your circumstances as well, different people's circumstances. If you're eating well and living in extreme luxuries while your neighbours are starving, then that's going to be something surely that requires more of a reckoning, like you have in many countries, in other countries, not so much here. You find people living in very big rich mansions, and all around them you have like shanty towns, or huts, people living very extreme poverty. Right next to the people are living in extreme luxury. So those people are obviously they're going to have a reckoning, they're going to have a responsibility towards their neighbours, So that's the thing, sometimes they're not just black and white answers for things. But an interesting book I was reading the other day, Shaykh Abu Hassan al-Nadwi, rahimahullah. He's one of the biggest scholars of our time. He died a few years ago, Abu Hassan al-Nadwi. And he was very well respected throughout the Muslim world. He wrote many books. One of them, he wrote a book about, I was reading the English translation, which is simply called Islam and the World. Very important book, because in that book he actually looks at the whole he makes a historical survey until the present time, because from knowing our history we understand our present. There's no way to understand what condition we're in now without knowing our history. So what he does, he traces our history from before Islam to the Prophet ﷺ's life, to the Khulafa Rashidun, to after that, when Muslims were in their great power and civilization and glory and everything, and then how the Muslims declined and Europe became ascendant. So he traces all of that in some detail until the present day. So he talks about the high point of Muslim civilization and then how it declined. And so then from there, then the final chapter is on then how to bring Muslims back up again, Anyway, so it's a very good book for people to read. But one of the important things he mentions there, or I thought was quite an amazing thing, was related to this exactly, was about the Zuhud, about the Prophet ﷺ. He said these people, the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, they became a people that were able to transform the rest of mankind, to transform the lives of humanity for the better. The Prophet ﷺ literally came at a time when human beings were suffering, around the world in severe, degradation. Civilization was just becoming very, like it is now, Western civilization just becoming very degraded, collapsing of morals, all of these things, injustices between rich and poor. So it was like that at that time when the Prophet ﷺ came, and then he, with these Sahaba, they transformed that world that they live in. And he said they did that because the Prophet ﷺ, he was there to sacrifice, He was making a lot of sacrifice, self-sacrifice. So he was denying himself pleasures of this world and his family around him. He was denying them the pleasures of this world, because they were willing to sacrifice those pleasures for the betterment of society and for the betterment of human beings. And the Sahaba took that from him as well. That type of self-sacrifice and denying one's own pleasures to struggle and strive in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So through that self-sacrifice, they were able to then transform the lives of all the human beings on the earth, for the better, and create this great civilization, which is founded on principles of the justice of the Quran, social justice, getting rid of social inequalities, getting rid of racism, all of these things. So he said that's the thing, they had that self-sacrifice though. They were denying themselves the pleasures of this world. They didn't do what they did by indulging themselves in the luxuries and pleasures of the dunya. So that's part of it as well. It's not so much. This is not so much for someone who just wants to get by, just follow the crowd, just be like a sheep following the crowd, which is what most people tend to do. This is for people who want to aspire to something higher, and to do something for the deen, and to do something for the betterment of people as well, of society, of human beings, And that, to some of us, that might just sound really alien concept, to do something for society, or to do something for human beings. Because why? Because we're in such an individualistic age. And in the West, and in the culture, the predominant culture that's around us, is become, some sociologists now, they refer to it as hyper-individualistic. It's just become individualistic to such an extreme, in the society around us, to the extent where, the bonds between parents and children are breaking down. The bonds between husband and wives are breaking down. That really core relationships. They're becoming less and less meaning, as more than I do, the predominant culture now. Even that, the most closest of all bonds between any human being is that between husband and wife. Yeah, husband and wife. You might think mother and child. You might think, it should be parent and child, mother and child. Although it may be something that can be debatable. Yeah? But the Quran talks about the zawj, that he made the nafs and he made from the nafs its zawj, its partner. And Hawa was made from the rib of Adam, the actual rib of Adam. In other words, meaning she was actually part of him. You see what I mean? That's one of the wisdoms of why Hawa was actually created from the rib. Why wasn't she just created separately? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could have created her as a complete separate creation, another human being from clay, for example. But this is one of the wisdoms. She was created from part of him. So it's like part of him. You see what I mean? When they come together, the husband and wife, it's like it's like becoming whole again. Part of his, it's becoming whole. That's the closeness of that relationship. And even that now has just become disrupted in our culture. There's no, they're putting away that concept now. So forget about all that thing about love and having marriage and long-term relationships or anything, Forget about all of that. Just, all you have to do is just fulfill your animal desires. And then move on. Previously it used to be like, it used to be men that were given that type of, that type of character that they can sleep around or whatever, with different women. Even here, in this type of culture. But now even the women are being socialized to become like that as well. When you finish with that man, just let him go, dump him, leave him. You have to be like a power woman, or whatever they call them, these what do you call them? These women that are like corporate women and like power. So they have to be like men. So this is just what's happening. So the idea of people now are not even prepared to make any sacrifice for their own partner or their own children, let alone for wider society. So that's why these things may seem just like coming so alien, but this is not how people have been. This is very, very different. It's a very new situation. I'd say just in this generation itself. Even if you go back to our parents' generation, we're not like that. They still had a sense of doing things for your society, for the community, and all of those things. So these are very, very recent change in the culture, and my feeling is driven by media, television, film, all of these things. That's what's driving all of these social and cultural changes. Because human beings, by their natures, they are imitators. You see a child when they grow up, they're always copying elder children, copying adults. That's how human beings learn how to behave. As human beings, that's how we learn how to behave. We imitate. And this doesn't stop when you get into adult. It continues just by our nature. We're always looking at role models, or people that we imitate or copy. So if you're giving people all of this television and film, you're giving people things to imitate, and then at the same time you're isolating the human beings. So you're getting people that don't have other community around them. So the only thing they do have is that television and that film. That's the only role models they do have. Because at the same time there's no wider communities, there's no other people that they interact with that they can respect in that way or imitate. Obviously, the debate will be, does television and film just simply reflect the society, rather than actually driving the change? But I would definitely argue that it's actually the driver for the change. Even in just simple market terms, if we put aside any conspiracy theories or that there's people trying to actually corrupt society, just simply in economic terms, this drives itself. Because let's say you're someone who makes TV programs, or you're someone who makes films. Now you find that by putting more immoral stuff into your products, you're going to get more viewers, right? You're going to do that more, because at the end of the day, you are trying to make more money. So just the fact of trying to make more and more money will drive this process like a downward spiral, So the more, they show things that are, immoral or go against, human beings' higher virtues, but they get more of an audience. So it's like the shahawat, are being fed, and it's like it becomes a vicious downward spiral then of the things that is produced gets worse and worse, But then more and more people will watch it because then they're getting more and more corrupt at the same time. So that's what he was talking about, the halal, how much of the halal you should take, and so we were talking about the self-sacrifice. If we really want to become people who are going to be people who support this deen in this time, this time of very, very dark times that we live in, of huge corruption, if we're going to become the people that support this deen, which is the only deen, the only message that can have anything to say in the time that we live in. The Quran is the only book that can say something against that dominant order that we live in. But the Quran needs the carriers. We have to become those carriers of Quran. And to become that, we have to have this self-sacrifice. There's no way we can indulge in all of the pleasures of the dunya that are presented to us and still think that we will be the carriers of this message. Now that's not to say that some of the great Sahaba weren't very wealthy. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, very wealthy Sahaba, and they were from the top of the Sahaba, but look at the sacrifices they made from their wealth. It doesn't mean they have to give all of their wealth, but look at the sacrifice they made. Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, when they were preparing for the battle against the Romans, and the Prophet ﷺ was very much exhorting people to give, because they needed, this is a big thing, they're going to go and face a Roman imperial army. It's no joke for the Arabs to try to do that from Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ was really, really encouraging them strongly to give money. And even the Quran, so many strong ayahs of Quran. And so Sayyidina Uthman bought 100 camels, fully loaded camels, with equipment and everything. And that in that day, 100 camels with all of that gear was a huge, huge amount of wealth. And then the Prophet ﷺ was again exhorting, and he bought 100 again. And the third time he bought 100 again. So 300 camels fully prepared and equipped for the battle. And after that, the Prophet ﷺ said, "There's no blame against Uthman after today." So that's the type of sacrifice they were making. When the ayah of Quran was revealed, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, you will never attain to piety until you spend of that which you love. One of the Sahaba came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said to me, the most beloved thing to me is this garden that I have in Medina. A garden, like green garden and fruit trees and all that stuff. And he said, I give it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the type of sacrifice. And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. It's amazing if you think about it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us all of these blessings. For nothing that we did to deserve it, He gave us our life and all of these blessings we have upon our physical bodies, our aqal, our ruh, our eyes, our hearing, everything, and then all of this money that we have, family, all of these things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. And what does He want from us is to give back to Him. To give this back to Him willingly. He wants us to give it back of our own choice. And if we give it back to him of our own choice, then he gives us an eternal reward in paradise. Much better than the thing we're going to even give back to him. That's a simple bargain that's been done. That's what it says in the Quran. You know, rejoice in the bargain you've done, you've made with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a great bargain. But you know, خُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضعيفة, and the insan is halu'a. You know? The human being is weak. The human being is very impatient. Doesn't want to wait for the next world to have his reward. The human being is bakhil as well, miserly. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking us for, but we don't want to, we don't want to give. So it says, you know, the question was asked, how do we know that what we are taking from the permissible is hasanan and good, and it's not that which will be reckoned against that, like you mentioned. Where do we go to? Is that the place?
Yeah, فإن قلت فما هذا الحبس والحساب اللذان يلزمان العبد or اللذان يلزمان العبد.
Fine, good. Oh, okay. What is the meaning of the habas and the hisab? If we take from the permissible more than our very, very basic necessity, remember Imam al-Ghazali said you would be taken to reckoning and you would be restricted or imprisoned as well, remember. So he said, what's the meaning of this? So this is for taking the halal. It's not saying you'll be punished, but it says you will be taken to reckoning and you will be imprisoned. So the meaning of that, he says, فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْحِسَابَ أَن تُسْأَلَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ عَمْ مَاذَا اكْتَسَبْتَ وَفِي مَاذَا أَنْفَقْتَ وَمَاذَا أَرَدْتَ بِذَلِكَ. The meaning of hisab, reckoning, is on the day of judgment, you will be asked in detail, what did you earn? What did you, all of this money that you earned, the salary, etc. Where did you spend it? And what did you intend? Or what was your intention when you were spending this money? In other words, if someone says, oh Allah, I spent it in charity, you'll also be asked, what was your intention? Was it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or were you simply trying to get a good name amongst the people? Yeah? Like you see nowadays, you know, not trying to bring that old thing, but you know, everyone sees that in the masjids, people giving thousands of pounds. But they will be asked, you know, what was your intention? Was it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or was it so that the community could say, look at this man, he's giving thousands of pounds, he's so rich and all this stuff. وَالْحَبَسُ حَبَسٌ عَنِ الْجَنَّةِ مُدَّةَ حِسَابِ ذَلِكَ. What does he mean by imprisonment? It means during the time you will be given this reckoning, you will be imprisoned in a way that you will not be free. You will not be able to go to Jannah until you've answered all of these questions about your wealth and where you spent your wealth. في عرصة القيامة بين أهوالها ومخاوفتها ومخاوفها عريان عطشان وكفى بذلك بلية. So he said, enough of this is a tribulation, that you will be in this state of panic and fear and nakedness and thirst while you're being questioned in detail about where you spent your money and your wealth. فإذا قيل فالله سبحانه قد أحل لنا هذا الحلال فاللوم والتعيير في أخذه لماذا. So if someone was to ask, but you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made halal all these things for us, yeah? So why do we have to have all of this blameworthiness for simply taking the thing which is halal? فاعلم أن اللوم والتعيير لتركه الأدب. كَمَنْ أَجْلَسَ عَلَى مَائِدَةِ الْمَلِكِ فَتَرَكَ الْأَدَبِ. So Imam al-Ghazali says, just to try to explain further, like a metaphor, he says, this blameworthiness and so on is because you haven't kept the correct adab of how to lead your life and how to deal with your wealth. It's like someone who was invited to a dinner with a king, and he comes to eat, but he doesn't follow the correct adab of eating from that meal. فإنه يعير بذلك ويلام. He would be considered blameworthy. He would be someone who would be considered, why is he behaving in such a way? Not that he's doing something which is haram. When كان تعامله مباح, even though it's mubah, it's permissible for him to eat that food, but it's the way he's going about it. والأصل في هذا الباب أن الله تعالى خلق العبد لعبادته وهو عبد الله تعالى من كل وجه. So it says the principle here is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us all to be His slaves for His ibadah, to worship Him. So each of us is the abd of Allah, the slave, the worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فحق العبد أن يعبد الله عز وجل بكل وجه يمكنه. Therefore, it's the right is upon the slave that he must worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and serve Him in each possible manner. ويجعل أفعاله كلها عبادة عن أي وجه أمكنه. فإن لم يفعل ذلك وآثر شهوة نفسه واشتغل بذلك عن عبادة ربه مع تمكنه من ذلك من غير تعذر، والدار دار خدمة وعبادة لا دار تنعم ولا دار شهوة استحق اللوم بذلك وتعيير من سيده. So basically he's trying to say, what's the function, what's the work of a slave? Should be his outlook in life? It should be to serve his master. Not to become preoccupied with doing all sorts of other things like feeding his own desires and so on. Yeah? So if someone starts neglecting the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and starts fulfilling his own desires more and more, and this will probably preoccupy and deviate him from fulfilling what is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he's no longer in that mode of service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's become someone who's more in the mode of servicing himself or his own self or his own desires. That's why he becomes someone who now becomes blameworthy and someone who should be taken to reckoning. Yeah? So it's like a whole, what's your whole purpose in life? What's your whole orientation? It's like that, you see. If your whole orientation is, and it's always, your whole thing is that you're here to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to serve the deen of Allah. Because to serve Allah means to serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah Himself, you can't do anything for Him. You see what I mean? There's nothing we can do to serve Him. We're not going to, like one of the ignorant people said in the story of Jalal al-Rumi, oh God, I want to wash your feet and I want to wash your big toe. You can't wash Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's feet. You can't benefit Him in any way. He's absolutely ghani. He's absolutely ghani. He has absolutely no need. So when it says to serve Allah, it means to serve the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this job, this work. Yeah? He said, you're mighty bad, but how do we serve Him? We have to then serve His deen. We have to follow the Sharia. We have to fulfill what is fard. Yeah? So here, there's fard ayn and there's fard kifaya. And many people often forget the fard kifaya. You can't just say fard kifaya, someone else is doing that. Yeah? The very fact that they call fard kifaya means it's obligatory. We have to do that as a community. So when they're not being fulfilled, that means we're all sinful. We're not fulfilling our obligation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And many of the fard kifayat now are not being fulfilled in any way, shape or form. Yeah? So that means we are sinful unless we are trying to do something about that. And that's where I think, Muslims are definitely not getting the point. Because we're falling into that trap, what the West is teaching us, that your religion is just something for your private life. It's just something, just do your 5 daily prayers, fast in Ramadan, no problem. We'll give you prayer rooms, we'll let you go at iftar time for a 5-minute break from work, etc. There's no problem. But what about the fard kifayat? And many scholars argue they're actually the more important obligations that are upon the community, because they safeguard the whole of the society, those things which are upon the community.
Outside of the obvious ones, which ones have you got in mind?
There's all sorts, things like
So the itikaf, janazah.
I think they're the ones we did by that. I think the most important ones are those that were first revealed in the Quran in Mecca, which are the feeding of the poor, the taking care of the orphans in society. So basically, those people who don't have the means to take care of themselves within your society, as a community, we must take care of them. And then from there, things like having, the most important right now are to have teachers who can teach the deen. Because if we don't have teachers or people that can teach the deen, then the deen becomes lost within a generation. The actual teaching of Islam itself is the most vital thing to preserve. So that's the first fard, to have institutions like this or others that will be actually able to preserve the teaching of what is halal and haram. If we don't have that, then everything becomes lost, But you can't act without knowledge. So first of all, to have, obviously protect our children from the societies we're in by having schools for them so we can teach them the deen, etc. And then there's all different levels, but I think they're the most important ones right now. There have to be scholars that can respond to the challenges of the time, the aqidah challenges of the time, theological questions. For that we need within the community to have people that are paid, to go and study, to become scholars. As a community, that's supposed to be supporting this type of effort. That's what it means by fard kifaya. In Britain, I don't know if it's still the case now, but some years back they were saying there was a lot of Muslim orphans, from places like Bosnia, Albania, things like that. And they were placing them with non-Muslim families. I think it was only because there was a lack of people to take them. There was a lack of Muslim families to take them. So as a Muslim community, that became a fard kifaya. We have to have orphanages, funded, that should be paid by the community, where Muslim orphans can be brought up. These are very strong fard kifayas that we have to deal with.
Could you, say that for donors as well? For donor.
What's a donor like?
So, for example, not only giving blood, because there's a shortage of Asian blood in the NHS, and whether that's giving the sort of or giving your body parts when you die.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that particular controversy, because obviously some scholars have gone against it, but that's the sort of thing, that would become under, because they're all things that are obligatory upon the community. So this is the thing, you can imagine, if someone becomes more and more occupied in getting dunyawi pleasures and getting more prestige in their worldly affairs, higher rank at work, or getting more money and saving bigger for themselves, always feeding their own self, they are going to neglect these duties towards the community, these fard ains. Yeah, they may well be doing their ibadah, their 5 daily prayers. Yeah? But this is almost secondary for a mu'min. Yeah? And once again, refer you to that book by Shaykh Hassan al-Nadwi, Islam and the World. Yeah? Very much he talks about this idea of how Muslims need to be reignited with the teachings of the Deen about social justice, about caring for the poor and the orphans and all of these things that Islam teaches. Because Sahaba could have done that. They could have just said, "Oh, I'll just do my 5 daily prayers and do my fast of Ramadan and that's it. That's my Deen. That's my ticket to Jannah." But they didn't do that. Yeah, they were there to make that sacrifice, deny themselves those pleasures to work for the establishment of the Deen of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. فتأمل هذا الأصل راشدا ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. فهذه الجملة التي أردنا بيانها في إصلاح النفس وإلجامها بلجام التقوى. He says, as this come to the end of this chapter now, he says, this is a summary of what we wanted to say with regards to rectifying the self and restraining it with the restraint of taqwa. فرعها حقها واحتفظ بها جدا تفوز بالخير الكثير في الدارين إن شاء الله تعالى والله ولي التوفيق والإسمة بفضله ولي التوفيق والإسمة بفضله. So he says, so take very good care and consideration about what you've learned in this particular chapter. You will find success and great abundance in this world and the next if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. And Allah is the one who gives tawfiq and protects through His generosity. Next chapter, فصل في معالجة الدنيا والخلق والشيطان والنفس. So next chapter, any comments or questions about that so far? It's a very important chapter actually because he's talking about the boundaries between what is halal and haram and what is excessive. Because this is definitely something we as Muslims and the community are falling into this trap of, oh, it's halal, these things that we made halal for us, and people get more excessive into the love of the dunya. And that's the weakness of the Muslims in the age, excessive love of the luxuries of the world. As the Prophet ﷺ said in many Sahih Hadith, this is the thing that he feared for his community, the luxuries of the world being opened up for them. The Prophet ﷺ didn't fear in the Tawheed of the Muslims, in the Aqidah of the Muslims. The Aqidah of Muslims is very strong, grounded in the Quran, which is unchanging word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What he feared for the Muslims and his community was this aspect of getting indulgent in the luxuries of the world. So this section, the next section, is on the how to treat the love of the world and how to deal with these four obstacles that we've been talking about: the love of the world, love of socializing with people, or the harms of socializing with people, the shaitan, and the nafs, the lower desires of the nafs. These are the four things, the four enemies, as it's been mentioned in some books. The four enemies of the human being are these four. فعليك أيها الرجل ببذل المجهود في قطع هذه العقبة العظيمة الطويلة. Imam al-Ghazali says, oh you person, you must do your best and put your full effort into getting through this very long and difficult stage. This is a long and difficult stage of getting through these four obstacles. فإنها أعظم العقبات شدة وأكثرها مؤنة وأكبرها آفة وفتنة. This stage of these four obstacles is the most difficult of stages and the most arduous and the one that is most full of tribulations. فإن من هلك من الخلق كلهم إنما انقطعوا عن طريق الحق إما بسبب دنيا أو خلق أو شيطان أو نفس. If you look at all the people that have been destroyed, in other words, have ended in the hellfire, or will end up in the hellfire, all of them have been cut off from the straight path due to one of these four things: the love of the world, the socialization of harmful socialization, the shaitan, or their own desires and nafs. ولقد ذكرنا في كتبنا المصنفة من كتاب الأسرار والأحياء والقربة ما يبعث على الاهتمام بذلك. It says if you go to some of our other longer books like Ihya al-Ulumuddin, al-Asrar, etc., you will find in there much more details that will really show you the importance of these four things. ومقصود هذا الكتاب أني سألت الله تعالى أن يطلعني على سر معالجة النفس وأن يصلحني ويصلح بي. But it says, as for this book, my intention was that I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that for this book that He gives me an insight into the best way to deal with these obstacles, especially the nafs, and that He rectifies me and rectifies others through me, through this book. فاقتصرت في هذا الكتاب الشريف على نكت وجيزة لفظ غزيرة المعنى. So he says, in this book I have just very much summarized and restricted myself to very important points that are concise. تقنع من تأملها. تقنع من تأملها. It will be enough, sufficient for those who reflect upon them. وتدعه على واضحة من الطريق إن شاء الله تعالى, and it will take this person and leave him in a very clear path if he follows what is in this book. وهذا الفصل بنكت في معالجة الدنيا والخلق والشيطان والنفس. And this particular section is going to deal with some particular important points in how to deal with these four obstacles. Amma dunya. So he's extremely concise. It's going to be extremely concise compared to his other works in dealing how to deal with these four things. فحق لك أن تحذرها وتزهد فيها. As for the pleasures of this world, he says, it is befitting, it is only right that you beware of these pleasures of this dunya. And you are abstinent. You are abstinent therein. And for the husbands to also bring their wives along with them in this matter. Because the nature of women is they will be more inclined towards some of those things. You can delete this from the video later on. They'll be more inclined towards some of these things by the nature of, obviously this doesn't apply to every woman. There's many women out there, probably especially nowadays, that are far more pious than many men. Okay, so it's not like it's not one of those blanket statements, but generally, by the nature of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the nature of human beings, we see this in the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well, because that's always an example that we refer back to. Yeah? That at one time he split from his wives for 30 days, separated from them. And some of the Sahaba said Umar was thinking, the wives became very worried because they thought he divorced them. But it was to do with this thing, that they were inclining or asking for certain material things. Nothing compared to now. Obviously, they were very pious, the top pious women. They were not asking for any like luxuries or anything. But they had, and that the Quran clearly says that. So the Prophet ﷺ say to your wives, if they wish the luxuries of this world, then they're free to go. He releases them, he divorces them, and they can have whatever they want. But if they want what is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, then they will have a huge reward in the akhirah. So that was clearly said, and obviously they chose to stay with the Prophet ﷺ, and they made tawbah and everything, and they were the best of all women. But just because these things are there, just show us, teach us. This is part of the nature of husband and wife. It's often women are more orientated towards the household, so that to more those household goods, things like that they might want as well.
I recall reading I think last week, out of our beloved mothers of one of the wives, the Prophet used to provide for 1 year worth of provisions, because her faith in relation to the others were slightly weak. But for the other wives, he wouldn't provide more than half a day's or even a day's worth of provisions.
Yeah, correct. I mean, that's one way people have joined between the hadith, because there's some hadith which mention that they never had anything in their houses, and in some hadith mention they had up to a year provision. So that's how some of the scholars they joined. They said this was for some wives, they would have more provision, and some wives would have hardly nothing. And like you said, they said this was because of their level of their iman, etc. So that's a good point. Obviously we don't also you also have to work with people's limits as well. Don't break people as well. Just work with people. Like in one hadith, remember, the woman is from the bent rib of Adam, so don't try to straighten it because you'll break it. So there's a lot of hikmah in that particular. Well, obviously there's a lot of hikmah in everything, but a lot of hikmah teaching the husbands how to deal with the wives as well. So it's like take them in the right direction. Obviously first we need to be in the right direction ourselves. Take our families along as well. It's important. So Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam in the Quran, one of his praiseworthy qualities is mentioned that he used to get his family to establish the prayer. He used to get his family to establish the prayer. So that's part of the duty of the man of the house, his wife, children, etc. Make sure the prayer is being established, etc.
Even at that young age, is it perhaps worth getting the child to pray behind the mother?
Definitely. I mean, obviously the hadith says from the age of 7 start getting them to pray. But if you have younger kids, and normally obviously don't force them. But if normally they want to, so then you can encourage that. If they want to pray, then
no. What I'm trying to say is, when the husband's out at work during the day, and if the kids are
or make jama'ah or something.
Yeah,
maybe if it helps.
But praying behind their mother if it's a boy.
Yeah, I mean, not if he's baligh, then he should lead.
Yeah.
But if he's below bulugh, then just as a sort of encouragement, if it works, then I don't see any harm in it. Obviously, it's not valid for women to lead the prayer, but if the boy is baligh, then he should lead. The mother should follow him. Okay, so لأن الأمر لا يخلو عن ثلاثة. So beware of the luxuries of the world, and be just be moderate in your intake of worldly pleasures. لأن الأمر لا يخلو عن ثلاثة, because there's 3 things to consider. إما أنت من ذوي البصائر والفطن فحسبك أن الدنيا عدوة الله وهو حبيبك ووليك وأن الدنيا نقيضة عقلك والعقل قيمتك. He says, look, there's only 3 states that you could be in as a person. One is that you're someone who's got deep spiritual insight and a sharp intellect, or sharp understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. If you're one of these people, then it's enough for you to know that this world is the enemy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that He is the one that you love. And the one that is your friend and your guardian, your wali. And it's enough to know that the dunya is the, you could say, the opposite of your aql, or something that destroys your aql. Indulging more and more in the pleasures of the dunya is going to be detrimental to your intellect, in other words. Yeah? It could be also, excessive eating, drinking, all these, feeding all the appetites normally is going to blunten your intellect. And the intellect is your qima, is your most valuable possession. Here by intellect it doesn't just mean what we think. Intellect, it means more like the whole thing. Intellect, ruh, all of that comes under aql. The ruh is also another name for the aql. So he says, if you're one of these people who actually has got this understanding, that's all you need to know. وَإِمَّا أَنْتَ مِنْ ذَوِي الْهِمَّةِ فِي إِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى وَالْإِجْتِهَادِ. If you're not one of those people who has got this sharp insights and understanding of the deen, deep understanding, then you may be one of those people who has got a lot of, who wants to worship Allah and has got a lot of energy to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you get some people who have a lot of energy to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they may not be have the most sharpest insights or understanding of the deen. Unfortunately, these are often the people who get led astray and going to all of these different types of groups that are going around blowing up all sorts of innocent people and all that. Pakistan and our countries are rife with these unfortunate young people who may be from poor backgrounds, from villages, they don't have much education or they don't have much understanding, and they just follow any first preacher that comes along. They've got a lot of energy for worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they just will be led astray by anyone who can just quote a few hadith or verse of Quran or something like that. فَحَسْبُكَ أَنَّ الدُّنْيَا بَلَغَ مِنْ شُؤْمِهَا مَا يَمْنَعُكَ مِنْ إِرَادَتِهَا وتشغلك الفكرة فيها عن العبادة والخير فكيف نفسها. So it says, for you, if you're not one of those people who has got that deep understanding and grasp of the deen, but you've got this energy for the deen, just know that this dunya is a blameworthy and downgraded thing, the pleasures of this world, that will prevent you from getting to your desire, which is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That should be enough for you to know that. And that being occupied with the dunya is going to take you away from being occupied with doing ibadah. If you're so involved in business or all of these affairs of the world and you're always thinking about them, you won't be able to concentrate on your prayer. You won't be able to have time for your dhikr and to concentrate on that, because you're always thinking, people who are businessmen, they're always thinking about the business. So just knowing that should be enough for you to know that you need to abstain from this excessive indulgence in the worldly affairs. And if this is just thinking about it is going to preoccupy you so much, what about actually indulging in it? Is even worse.
Point 2, where all of us, alhamdulillah, know the reality that we're only here on a short sojourn, and the akhirah is infinite. How do we reconcile those kind of thoughts with our day-to-day in terms of investing or work, etc., etc.? How do we reconcile it? And I say that in the context of, for example, if you take that, not literally, but you have that, then there's no real desire for you to do well for yourself, if that makes sense. But sometimes perhaps you can do well for yourself because you have more sway over things and make it easy for the community. So whether it's investing with a view that you can then retire early and perform more ibadah, but you're not guaranteed to live. So what I'm trying to say is, how do you, first of all, how do we reconcile that with those kind of thoughts? And then secondly, how do we know that it's not shaitan deluding us into buying that rental property with a view to have that niyat?
Yeah, no, this is a brilliant question. It's always the same question, and it comes up. It happens in all of our lives all the time, you know. And it can be very difficult, tricky sometimes to know wherein lies the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think the key concept the key thing to get to, because once again it's not a black or white answer, everyone will have a different answer depending on their specific circumstance. And I've given different answers to different people, you know, on this issue. For example, there was a brother in Birmingham who was quite high up in the Birmingham City Council in terms of the executive, not councillor, but you know, the working officials. And he had actually got, and he was quite young, and he had actually got to the position. He was actually being offered to be made deputy leader of the council. And if he got that position, he would have been the youngest deputy leader ever in Europe or something like that. And he came to me and he asked me. He said, "Look, you know, this is the situation. I'm worried. This is like it's my pride and all this and hubb dunya. If I take this position and everything, and you know." So he didn't know whether he should do it or not, you know. In that case, I said to him, you should definitely go for it. Because already in the position he was, which was head of the planning department or something like that, he had made so much benefit for the Muslim community. You know, like you're saying, so any building that was built in Birmingham had to go through his department, and he was able to, as the head of the department, he was able to say to people, look, have you thought about wudu facility? Have you thought about a prayer facility? We've got X amount of Muslims in this city. You know, so he was able to have a massive impact on the Muslim community there. So that's one example, you know. Recently another brother was asking me, because it's quite a similar thing. He's in the medical profession, GP, and he was saying, look, I've got opportunity. I can become like a director of training GPs. You know, should I do it, or is it just like then I'll get less time for ibadat and getting more into dunya, things like that. But once again, by taking that position, he could probably help a lot of young Muslims, doctors, GPs, and make, you know, a lot of facilities available for them and things like that. So often, you know, if you have the right intention, it is better to get into more higher positions, if you see what I mean. If you're genuinely going to be helping Muslims. But on the other hand, there's going to be cases where it's not the best thing to do. You know, so for example, a young man, unmarried, he's got an option here. Should I go and study Islam for 5-6 years in Mauritania, let's say? Or should I follow my career as a GP and try to make lots of money, and then later on I can retire and all this? Or I'll get money and I'll be able to build a madrasa or something in 10 years' time. That person should leave and go and study the deen. You know? So you're going to give there's going to be different answers for different people depending on their particular circumstances, where they are, their age, you know, what influence they can have. You know, so it's going to very much. But the sort of principle how to deal with it is always think to yourself, what is going to be more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Which decision, you know, if I do this or this, not what's more pleasing to me. What's going to be more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And that's what you really sincerely have to try to figure out. And you can do istikhara as well. And sometimes the thing you do will be also more pleasing to your nafs. You know? It's not necessarily the case that whatever you do that is more pleasing to Allah is going to be less pleasing to your nafs. It may not be the case. It may be that the path that is more pleasing to Allah will actually correspond to what's more pleasing to your nafs. But that's fair enough. You know what I mean? As long as you sincerely did it for that reason. And sometimes obviously you can take advice from people who have, you know, probably more learning or anything, or even if they're not more learned but righteous person that has got knowledge, sometimes it's good to reflect off people as well. Because some of these decisions can be very, very difficult, you know. But I'll give you another example. There was one brother, a good 10 years ago, who used to be very practicing and enthusiastic and everything. And he started getting preoccupied, just pay off certain things or buy my own property, cash. Then I'm going to work part-time, and then I'll be able to do a lot more ibadat, So I'll work very hard now for a few years, and then I'll go part-time and I'll do lots of ibadat and qiyamul layl and all that stuff. 5 years passed. He'd been working 12-hour shifts, overtime, as much as working, lots of money, doing that, bought the property. After 5 years, then he was not ready to go part-time. He was saying, I've got to buy another property, because that'll be then, my children will be more secure in the future. Another 5 years, then I'll do my part-time and going more into the deen and everything. Another 5 years past, 10 years past, 15 years past now. That thing's gone, he's not gonna do that now. That whole desire is gone to devote himself more to the deen. So these are dangers. So there was clearly something that was the wrong step for him to take,
How many properties does he have now?
I don't know. I don't want to go into that, but I suspect he's got quite a substantial savings. So I think
I only say that because I see it sometimes even with brothers who go overseas to study, and alhamdulillah they've spent so much time studying, and when they've come back they've had no real game plan, that knowledge is not being aligned correctly, or it's not being utilized. So I see that of it, and so that's one aspect of it. And then secondly, for example, when we hear stories about the Sahaba who gave lump sum that garden, we know ultimately if we build something with it, of course that would be the most pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but if we then invested perhaps, I don't know, again that's what I mean, is it enough speaking, or is it that we're scared to lose that money, and we have a taste for accumulation, because this is inherent in us, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about it, so we need to try and wean that desire of accumulation.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just people have to just look closely at their own intentions and things like that, But these are very life issues, People do often have to make these decisions, and it can be difficult. Another good way to do it is, sometimes we don't know where's the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imagine yourself if one of the Sahaba was in your position, or even if the Prophet ﷺ is such a high example, it's hard for us to emulate, because he never kept any wealth overnight in his house. He would always give it straight away to sadaqah. But imagine if one of the great Sahaba was here, Sayyidina Umar or someone, how would they deal with that? That can often give us a good insight into what's the right thing to do. Suddenly it might just become very clear that you were deluding yourself. Okay, so it says وإما أنت من أهل الغفلة لا بصيرة لك تبصر الحقائق ولا همة لك تبعث على المكارم فحسبك أن الدنيا لا تبقى. He says either you're from the first category, second category, or the final category, you're from someone who is completely without any spiritual insight. You're someone who's completely away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ahlul Ghafla, people are heedless, they don't remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For you, it's enough to know that this dunya will not remain for long. So these are three ways to approach. This is da'wah, You look at the person you're speaking to before you give da'wah. So Imam al-Ghazali has given you the way to approach 3 different types of people. One are those people who are already people of insight, people of intellect. This is the argument that you will give them, the first one. Then you have those people that are not so sharp in their intellect or in their understanding of the deen, but they got a lot of energy. You give them the second argument. And then for those people who are away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now you want to give them da'wah, bring them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you tell them about the temporariness of the dunya. You know, all this thing they're working for, how it's going to soon disappear. Remind them of death. You know, remind them of how short their life is. إما أن تفارقها وإما أن تفارقك. Either you will leave the dunya, or the dunya will leave you. كما قال الحسن رضي الله عنه إن بقيت لك الدنيا لم تبقى لها. If the dunya, the worldly pleasures remain with you, you will not remain with them. Yeah. So, in other words, you might still be here, but the dunya may leave you. You may lose all your wealth, you know. Or even if you keep it, then you'll be leaving it behind soon enough. فأي فائدة إذن في طلبها? So what's the point of being so excessively pursuing and chasing something that you're about to leave at any moment? وإنفاق الأمر العزيز عليها, and using all your precious time, your whole life, hankering after these things which you're going to leave behind. وَلَقَدْ أَحْسَنَ الْقَائِلِ. Anyone got the poem in English? There's 3 lines. There's 2 poems. Maybe just read them in English, I think, if you have them.
The poet expressed himself when he said, donate this world to charity, for then you will obtain a pardon. This world is surely headed for complete extinction. What can you expect from a life that will not last? The nights will soon alter your expectation. This world of yours is just like a fleeting shadow. It shades you for a while, then announces its departure.
And the next 4 lines as well?
The intelligent person must therefore not be deceived by this world. The poet spoke truth when he said, this world is a muddled dream, or like a fleeing shadow. The clever man should not be deceived by that kind of thing. It's only got 2 lines here.
Oh, okay. وَأَمَّا الشَّيْطَانِ فَحَسْبُكَ. So that's all he's going to deal with, the love of the world in this section. It goes on to the shaitan. فَحَسْبُكَ فِيهِ مَا قَالَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى لِنَبِيِّهِ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم وَقُلْ رَبِّ أَعُوذُ بِكَ مِنْ هَمَزَاتِ الشَّيَاطِينِ وَأَعُوذُ بِكَ رَبِّ أَنْ يَحْضُرُونَ. So he says, enough is it to know that the Prophet ﷺ himself was commanded to say this following dua. O my Lord, I seek refuge with you from the hamazat of shayateen. I don't know what's the best way to translate that, maybe insinuations or something.
Whisperings.
Hamaza, whisperings or Wailun li kulli hamazatin lumaza. From the whispering suggestions of the devils or demons. And I seek refuge with you, Allah, that they are with me. So if the Prophet ﷺ was commanded to make this dua, what about the rest of us? فَهَذَا خَيْرُ الْعَالَمِينَ وَأَعْلَمُهُمْ وَأَعْقَلُهُمْ وَأَفْضَلُهُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. The Prophet ﷺ is the best of all the creation, the most knowledgeable, the best of them in virtue. يحتاج مع ذلك إلى أن يستعيذ بالله من شر الشيطان. Despite all of that, even he needs to seek Allah's refuge from the evils of these demons and devils. فكيف بك مع بجهلك ونقصك وغفلتك? How about you with all of your ignorance and your deficiencies and your heedlessness? وَأَمَّا الْخَلْقِ. So that's all about shaitan. As for khalq, human beings, socializing, the danger of socializing. فَحَسْبُكَ مِنْهُمْ أَنَّكَ لَوْ خَالَطْتَهُمْ وَوَافَقْتَهُمْ فِي أَهْوَائِهِمْ أَثِمْتَ وَأَفْسَدْتَ أَمْرَ آخِرَتِكَ وَإِنْ خَالَفْتَهُمْ تعبت بأذياتهم وجفواتهم وكدرت عليك أمر دنياك. So as for socializing with human beings, it's enough for you to know that if you mix with people and you go along with them, with their following their desires, you will end up sinning, and you will end up messing up your own akhirah. This is obviously with bad company, not with good company. Right? Good company is one of the best things, and bad company is one of the worst things. You know, it can ruin a human being, because by human beings, by nature, we follow the crowd, we go along with the crowd. It's difficult for human beings to do something different from the crowd, and many social psychological studies have shown this as well. Some pretty disturbing experiments they've done, you know, with people, how they follow along, even if they're just doing the worst things. You know, they've done experiments. One of the famous experiments, I think I can't remember the guy's name, but
Stanford.
Milgram, I think. They got these people, normal people from the public, and they had all these actors, but they didn't tell them they were actors. And they had a person in another room, but they could see through a screen. And they said to that layperson from the street, they said, you know, you have to ask questions. If the person gets the question wrong, you have to give them electric shock. And each time, the electric shock gets worse and worse. And the person who was telling him to do that was dressed like in a white coat and looked very official. And they were really shocked. You know, they found that the person of the general public didn't know what was going on. He would keep giving the electric shock whenever he was told to, even despite the actor on the other side was acting really like it's getting more and more severe pain, screaming and everything. You know, and they videoed it, and they showed the famous, and the guy saying, you know, are you sure? I need to do that. And the guy in the white coat, you know, the official is saying, yes, do it. So you're doing it, you know. So really, like, just they said, you know, this is what human beings are like, you know. They'll go along with the crowd. Yeah? So despite if you want to be a good person and want to do good things, if you're in a bad company, you will end up doing bad things. And the opposite, if you're in a good crowd, a good company, even if you haven't got that same level as those people, you'll end up doing those good things that they're doing. So very important to seek out good company and avoid bad company. ثم لا تأمن أن يلجئوك إلى معاداتهم ومناوئتهم. Have you got munawa'ah or munawala? مناوئة. فتقع في شرهم ولأنهم إن مدحوك وعظموك أخاف عليك الفتنة والعجب. So it says, you know, you have got no security, or you can't be safe if you socialize or mix with bad company, that you will not be going along with the things that they're doing and fall into the bad things that they're doing. You know, if you think, oh, I'll go and hang around with these brothers, but I won't do X, Y, so thing that they're doing, which is wrong. But you've got no guarantee that you'll be able to keep yourself free from that. And if they praise you, like, so you're the religious person and they're bad company, but they're saying, wow, you know, they're always praising you. Then Imam al-Ghazali says, I fear for you that you will fall into ujub, into pride and conceitedness because of that as well. So either way, there's danger for you. You know, the only time you go into that company is for da'wah, and you have to be a strong person to do that. You know, it's not for everyone. And it's good to get advice or permission from teachers or scholars or sheikhs before you try to enter into that field as well. Yeah? Because once again, you may be just deceiving yourself. Because the first and most important thing is to save yourself, not to worry about saving others first. Yeah? Save yourself, then think about saving others as well. And sometimes, shaitan can be leading people astray as well. Like, I think I should go and hang around with these brothers for hours on end. Sitting around with them, doing whatever they're doing, playing cards or whatever, but my intention is to give da'wah. No, that doesn't work like that, You're just following your own desires there. وإن ذموك وحقروك أخاف عليك الحزن تارة والغضب لغير الله تعالى أخرى. And if you go amongst this bad company and they, because you're religious, they're like putting you down and making fun of you, etc. Then Imam al-Ghazali says, I fear, because there's two things that they could praise you or they could put you down. If they put you down, then Imam al-Ghazali says, I fear that you may get into depression, or you might feel angry, but not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're feeling angry for your own thing, because you've been insulted. وَكِلَا الْأَمْرَيْنِ آفَةٌ مُهْلِكَةٌ. And both ways you're going to lose out. ثم اذكر حالك معهم بعدما صرت إلى القبر ب3 أيام كيف يتركونك ويهجرونك وينسونك ولا يكادون يذكرونك كأنك لم ترهم يوما ولم يروك فلم يبق هنالك معك إلا الله تعالى. So then he reminding us once again of our impending death. And so just Imam Ghazali mentioned this thing that it's important to think about this. How all of these people that you're so interested in socializing with now, 3 days after you die, 3 days after you die, they'll have nothing more to do with you. You won't even crop up in their memory again. Why it says 3 days? Because obviously in Islam we have this idea of 3 days. It's actually now Sharia. After 3 days, you don't mourn for the deceased except for the wife or her husband. Who has a special ruling. Once again shows the special link between the husband and wife. But for all other, even relations, friends, good friends, best friends, close relatives, once you bury them after 3 days, we don't mourn them. Because we accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they came from Him and they've gone back to Him. But now think of yourself, you're that dead person, once you've died. Just try to really put yourself in the position when you died. And you're put into your grave. 3 days later, no one's going to think about people who have died. How much do you remember them or do anything? What are their relations to them? Nothing, though. People that you've known, that you've been close to, close relatives, close friends that have died. Finished, out of your mind. That's what's going to happen to you. That's what happened to me when I die. No one's going to think about me after a few days. It's just a fact. Probably your wife, if you manage to carry on with her all that time. You never know, your wife might be khalas, gone at last.
If you never left your wife any inheritance, and she may not even remember.
Even if you leave inheritance, they're going to take your money, and that's it. You're gone from their thoughts. It's just a fact. It's a normal. That's what our life is. People move on. People are going to get over things.
So Imam Ghazali, I think he relates the story about Shaykh Shibli, and he says that of all the things that I've thought about, people have asked me how did I achieve success, and he said that I pondered over those things that accompany you to the grave, and he said there's family and friends, but the thing that stays with you in the grave is your amal and your actions. So he said that I decided to abandon everything else and focus on my amal. And in another narration he says that he studied under 400 masters, Shaykh Shibli, and he memorized 4,000 traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, which I believe he alludes to in Hadith. And he says, of all those, I left everything and just did muraqabah on one, and that one was work for the dunya, for how long you're going to be in it, work for the akhirah, for your stay in it, work for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for your need of Him, and work for the fire for your endurance of it.
So yeah, that's the thing, you know, just always to remember how short life is and what's going to happen after you die.
You can benefit people, obviously, after they passed away with dua and Quran.
Think about, I mean, how often people go even to visit a grave of someone they're near and close, you know, close people. You know, if you're lucky, you know, especially now day and age, people don't have time to do anything, you know. In the past, people would probably every Friday after Jummah they'd go to their local graveyard, be all, you know, give Fatiha to all their relatives. Nowadays, even that doesn't happen anymore, you know. So you're going to be in your grave, and no one's going to, all of these people that you're trying to impress or hang around with, or, you know, all these things, no one's going to be there except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We came from Allah, we belong to Allah, and we go back to Allah. That's it, khalas. أفلا يكون من الغبن العظيم أن تضيع أيامك الذي يرجع إليه آخر الأمر وحده ولا يبقى لك إلا هو أبد الآبدين والحاجات كلها إليه والتكلان كله عليه والاعتصام كله في كل حال وعند كل شدة وهول به وحده لا شريك له. So isn't it such a great tragedy or a great khaban, like a deception or a cheat? So I missed out one line. أيامك مع هؤلاء الخلق مع قلة الوفاء منهم وقلة البقاء معهم وتترك خدمة الله تعالى. Isn't it the greatest of all deceptions, or the greatest of all, what do you call it when you cheat someone? Fraud. Yeah? The greatest fraud, that you are wasting all of your days with these people when they're not going to even stay with you after you die. They're not even going to think about you after you died. And you're leaving the worship and the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the one that all affairs go back to. He's the only one that's going to remain with you after you die. All of your needs are fulfilled through Him alone. Everything that you need to rely upon, you can only rely upon Him. Okay? Every hardship, affliction and tragedy you go through, you always turn back to Him. And He's the only one that can give you a way out. فَتَأَمَّلْ يَا مِسْكِينَ. So think, oh you wretched poor person. لَعَلَّكَ تُرْشَدْ إِنْ شَاءَ اللَّهِ. Hopefully you will be guided if Allah wills. وَاللَّهُ وَلِيُّ التَّوْفِيقِ بِفَضْلِ. Allah is the one who gives tawfiq through His generosity. Inshallah ta'ala, next week we'll talk about the nafs, how to deal with the nafs. Any questions or anything?